My name is Clara Whitmore, 32 years old, a data analyst in Charleston. People at work call me Steady, the kind of person who color codes spreadsheets and keeps a spare umbrella in her car. Maybe they're right. I've built my life around order after growing up in chaos. Predictability feels like peace. That morning, sunlight poured through my kitchen window, painting the counter gold as the coffee machine hummed. I had 10 quiet minutes before my first video meeting. Then came a knock. Firm, repetitive, too familiar. When I opened the door, Ray Whitmore stood there, my father. His grin was the same wide, careless, and meant to charm, but his eyes were bloodshot, calculating. Beside him slouched my half-brother Landon, 20, maybe 21, dressed like a walking ad for expensive streetwear. Clara, Dad said, his voice soft, rehearsed. Look at you. You've done well for yourself. The air shifted. My heart thudded once, hard. I hadn't seen him in almost 8 years, not since his last voicemail asking for a small loan and disappearing when I said no. They stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Landon scanned the apartment, nodding at the furniture. Not bad for a nerd, he muttered, tossing himself onto the couch. Dad chuckled like it was a compliment. Family helps family, right? He said, patting my shoulder as if he still had the right. His tone carried the same old weight, half expectation, half demand. The coffee had gone cold. I met his gaze, steady now, my voice low but certain. Not this time. Dad. He blinked, as if I'd spoken a language he'd forgotten. And as the silence stretched, I realized the peace I'd built was about to be tested in ways I hadn't imagined. After they left that morning, the silence in my apartment felt heavier than before. I sat on the couch where Landon's sneakers had rested, the faint scent of his cologne still hanging in the air. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with recognition. Their visit had awakened something old, something I'd spent years trying to outgrow. I was 12 again, back in our cramped duplex on the outskirts of Knoxville, Tennessee. The wallpaper curled at the corners. The smell of cigarette smoke clung to everything, and the nights stretched long because my father never came home until the bars closed. Mom had already left by then, packed her suitcase one quiet Sunday, and disappeared without a backward glance. Dad said she was selfish, that she'd left him to carry the weight of raising a daughter alone. What he didn't say was that he gambled away what little we had, chasing wins that never came. By the time I started babysitting for the neighbors, the electric bill was already a month overdue. I'd slip folded 20s into the kitchen drawer, pretending it was enough to keep the lights on. One night, when I asked why he hadn't paid rent, he slammed his beer down and glared at me. "You owe me," he said, his voice rough and slurred, "for every meal I ever paid for every damn thing you've got because of me." I remember the burn in my throat as I nodded, swallowing the words I wanted to scream. Guilt became my currency, the way I earned peace in that house. Now, sitting in my polished living room 2 decades later, I could still hear his voice like a ledger being read aloud. That debt, the one he'd invented to keep me small, had never been erased in his mind. It had only grown interest. And today's visit wasn't a surprise, it was a collection call. 2 evenings later, they showed up again. No warning, no text, just a knock followed by my father's voice calling my name like we'd been close all these years. I hesitated, staring at the door handle, then opened it anyway. Ray stood there holding a paper bag of takeout and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Thought we'd bring dinner," he said. "Spend a little time as a family," behind him. Landon was tapping on his phone, his earbuds still in. I should have said no. But old habits die hard, and politeness was one of the few survival skills my childhood taught me. We sat around the kitchen table while the smell of sesame chicken filled the air. Ray talked about how Charleston had grown fancy, how he missed having me around, how family should stay connected. His tone was rehearsed, every sentence building toward something. I waited for it, the real reason, like waiting for thunder after lightning. It came halfway through the meal. He set his chopsticks down, cleared his throat, and looked me straight in the eye. "You've done well for yourself, Clara," he said. "And Landon's trying to follow your example. He's started a custom sneaker line, bright kid. Real potential, but he's hit a rough patch." Landon smirked, leaning back. "It's not a big deal, just some startup costs. 60,000, give or take." Ray chuckled like that number was pocket change. "All he needs is a little help getting off the ground. Maybe 3,000 a month, just till things take off." The air tightened. I set down my fork carefully. 3,000 a month. Landon shrugged. "You make what?" "6 figures. Don't be stingy." My father's voice softened. "After all I sacrificed for you, honey, it's nothing compared to what family's worth." That word sacrificed hit harder than the number. I felt the same dull ache that had followed me from Knoxville to every city since. Guilt pressing at the edges, asking to be let back in, but I kept my face calm, my tone even. "I'm proud of you for wanting to start something, Landon," I said, "but I can't fund it." The silence that followed was thick and familiar, the kind that used to come before shouting. Only this time, I didn't flinch. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. The building was still quiet, the hum of computers mixing with the faint scent of burnt coffee from the night crew. Normally, the first hour of my day was sacred spreadsheets, algorithms, a kind of meditation through numbers. But that morning, the numbers I couldn't stop thinking about weren't from work. $60,000, $3,000 a month. The math didn't add up, not in any honest world. I opened my laptop, telling myself I was just curious. A simple search, nothing more. Within minutes, the curiosity turned to dread. Landon's custom sneaker line had a bare-bones website built from a free template, the contact page listing a P.O. box in Atlanta, the so-called business address linked to a rented office shared by 6 unrelated companies. Digging deeper, I found public records and LLC filed under my father's name. No tax ID, no inventory, no transactions except a few transfers to a personal checking account. The listed expenses were padded with fake invoices, design fees that didn't exist, marketing costs paid to shell companies, and beneath it all, 2 luxury car leases under the business account. My stomach sank. This wasn't ambition. It was a funnel, a setup. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen. For years, I'd told myself my father's flaws were just weakness, bad decisions, not bad intentions. But the pattern was too clear now. He wasn't asking for help. He was recruiting another source of income. The déjà vu was sharp enough to hurt. The same man who once gambled away rent money was now gambling with my success. I opened a blank folder and began to save screenshots, every record, every document, every trace that tied him to it. My hands were steady, methodical. I labeled each file by date, a habit learned from years of data audits. When I was done, I closed my laptop and stared out the office window at Charleston's skyline, washed in late morning light. The truth was cold, factual. Unarguable numbers didn't lie, and neither did patterns. And somewhere deep down, I realized I was no longer the daughter trying to fix things. I was the woman quietly preparing for war. By Friday, my father had managed to turn a simple dinner invitation into a test of loyalty. The text came mid-afternoon dinner at Aunt Miriam's tonight, just family. We all miss you. I stared at it for a full minute before replying with a polite, sure, old reflexes die hard. And Aunt Miriam had always been the gentlest branch on a thorny family tree. Her house in Mount Pleasant smelled like roasted chicken and lemon polish when I arrived. The dining room was crowded. My father, Landon, 2 cousins I hadn't seen in years. Miriam greeted me with a soft hug, whispering, he just wants to make peace. Honey, her eyes were kind, but nervous. Dinner began with laughter that felt rehearsed. My father told stories about my fancy job, painting me as the prodigal daughter who'd made it big. Every toast, Every chuckle circled back to money. "We're all proud of her," one cousin said, "but sometimes success makes people forget where they came from." Another nodded, eyes on me. "Families should stick together, especially when one of us has more to give." I smiled tightly, keeping my fork steady. Their words weren't cruel, not outright, but they carried the familiar scent of guilt disguised as affection. I recognized the choreography: build me up, then press until I bend. After dessert, the others drifted into the living room. My father lingered at the table, sliding a manila envelope toward me. "Just a small formality," he said, his voice low. "Some paperwork for Landon's business, a guarantee to show investors you're backing him. You don't even have to pay anything, just sign." The room seemed to shrink. I stared at the pen beside the papers, the same kind I used at work every day. Simple, harmless, binding. "Dad," I said quietly. "No." He frowned, playing the wounded parent. "You think I'd ever hurt you? After all I did, I stood, smoothing my dress, heart pounding but calm. That's exactly why I won't sign." I gathered my bag, pushed the chair in, and left the envelope untouched. The pen lay there, catching the light from the chandelier, ordinary, silver, motionless. It was the first time in my life that my silence spoke louder than his demands. 3 days after the dinner, I was back at my desk when my phone buzzed with a bank alert. "New credit inquiry detected." I frowned, assuming it was some algorithmic error. I hadn't applied for anything new in years. But when I opened the email, my stomach turned cold. The application listed my name, address, and last 4 digits of my social security number, filed for a $30,000 business line of credit. At first, I thought it had to be identity theft, a stranger, some random scam. Then I saw the business name L.W. Custom Footwear, LLC. My pulse spiked. Landon's initials. The world blurred for a second, the office noise, the tapping keyboards, the faint smell of toner, everything fading except the screen in front of me. I called the bank's fraud department, explaining through clenched teeth that I had never signed anything. They confirmed the application had been submitted in person at a branch in Somerville, 40 minutes away, complete with a photocopy of my driver's license and a digital signature. It wasn't just a lie, it was precision theft. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking. Years ago, I would have cried or tried to reason with him, convincing myself he didn't mean harm. But the old instinct to excuse, to mend, to protect was gone. In its place was focus. That evening, I set up my laptop at the kitchen table and began building a folder labeled Fraud Evidence. Screenshots, bank emails, time-stamped calls, a timeline in Excel. I treated it like a project because that's what my father had taught me to survive, make everything measurable. When I compared the signature from the loan form with my own, I noticed the small differences: the way he looped the R in Whitmore tighter than I ever did, my father's handwriting, pretending to be mine. Something in me went still. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about power, his belief that I still belonged to him, that he could write my name and claim my life. I closed the file, backed it up to a hard drive, and looked around my quiet apartment. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what he'd do next. I was ready to respond. It was Saturday afternoon when the knock came again, loud, impatient, the rhythm of ownership. I already knew who it was. Ray stood on the porch, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. Landon leaned against the railing, chewing gum, his sunglasses hiding the smirk I'd memorized. "You've been avoiding us," my father said, stepping inside without permission. "We need to talk." I didn't answer. The folder was already on the dining table, neat and waiting. He started pacing, his voice rising. "You think you're better than us now. I gave you everything I had, Clara. And this is how you repay me. I need my share of what you've built. Family doesn't shut family out." Landon flopped onto a chair, scrolling his phone. "You could at least help with the loan." "It's already approved. You'll mess it up if you start whining about it. That word approved ignited something cold and steady inside me. I opened the folder and laid out the printed documents, the forged application, the mismatched signature, the date stamps. Here's what's going to happen, I said quietly. You'll both leave. And then you'll get a letter from my attorney, Mark Sullivan. It outlines the fraud case I'm filing against you. Ray froze, eyes narrowing. You wouldn't do that to your own father. I met his stare. You raised me to survive lies. You shouldn't be surprised I caught yours. For a second, no one moved. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator. Then he slammed his fist against the table, making the papers jump. Ungrateful, he spat. Everything I did for you, and you turn on me like this. Landon snorted. All this over some dumb paperwork. I pushed the folder toward them, the legal letter resting on top. Take it. Or don't. Either way. We're done. My voice never wavered. No shouting, no pleading, just the quiet authority of someone who had finally stopped trying to be loved. Ray looked at me one last time, disbelief warring with fury, but he knew. The power had shifted. When the door closed behind them, the silence that followed wasn't fear. It was freedom. The fallout came faster than I expected. Within a week, my phone buzzed with messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, some angry, some disappointed, all repeating the same story. Ray had told everyone I'd turned against the family, that success had made me greedy and cruel. He says you threatened to have him arrested. One cousin texted, "Please tell me that's not true." I didn't bother replying. Explaining myself to people who'd already chosen their version of me felt like trying to clean a wound that wasn't mine. By the end of the month, the group chat I'd been part of since college graduations and baby announcements went silent. Invitations stopped. My name disappeared from family dinners. For years, I'd feared exile. Now that it had arrived, it felt strangely familiar, like the quiet after an old argument, the kind where no one wins. Then, one evening, Aunt Miriam called. Her voice was low, hesitant. "Honey, I need to tell you something," she said. "You did the right thing. Your father once forged my name too on a car loan. I paid it off just to make it stop." The admission landed heavy and soft at once. Relief, sorrow, and understanding braided together. "I should have warned you," she whispered. "But I thought maybe he'd changed." "He didn't," I said quietly. "But I did." We stayed on the phone for an hour, mostly in silence. That small thread of truth between us felt like more family than I'd known in years. News of Landon's business failure spread through his friends soon after. The investors were gone, the leased cars repossessed. He posted cryptic stories online about betrayal, then vanished from social media altogether. There was a flicker of vindication in seeing their stories unravel. But it didn't taste like victory. It was hollow, the kind that echoes instead of satisfies. I'd wanted justice, and I was getting it, but standing alone in my apartment, with no one left to call it a triumph. I finally understood the cost of peace. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and rain. My attorney, Mark Sullivan, moved with calm precision, flipping through the thick stack of evidence I'd built. Screenshots, signed statements, timestamps, each page a quiet record of betrayal. When he filed the report, I felt something in my chest unclench. Not relief exactly, but acknowledgement. Within 2 weeks, the investigation began. My father's accounts were frozen, his fraudulent line of credit suspended pending review. There were calls from the bank. Then, silence. I didn't take pleasure in it. Not really. Watching justice unfold felt like watching surgery necessary, sterile and painful to witness. At night, I'd sit by the window and imagine him back in Knoxville, pacing his small apartment, cursing my name. I wondered if he blamed me, or if, for a brief second, he recognized the shape of what he'd done. I would never know. The following month, I drove north, the highway unfolding like an old memory. Knoxville looked smaller than I remembered, gentler somehow. The diner where he used to work had been turned into a thrift store. I stopped outside the cemetery on the hill, a place I hadn't visited in years. My mother's grave was still there, the marble cracked with time. I knelt in front of it, pulling from my bag a folded copy of the affidavit, the proof that I had finally drawn the line. I laid it beside her name, the paper fluttering in the breeze. "You'd have told me to keep the proof," I whispered, "and to keep going." For the first time in months, my breathing evened. The ache in my chest didn't vanish, but it quieted, settling into something steady. Justice hadn't healed what love broke, but it had given me something close, a kind of peace built from truth, documented and real. A year can pass quietly when you stop waiting for apologies. Charleston's air softened with spring again, and the city had settled into the rhythm I once longed for: steady, familiar, honest. I'd kept my job at the firm but started something on the side, a small consultancy that offered workshops in financial literacy for women from broken families. It began with 5 people in a library meeting room and grew into something I hadn't expected: a circle of women who knew the language of survival all too well. I taught them how to read contracts, track expenses, and recognize manipulation disguised as love. Every time one of them smiled in understanding, I felt a quiet kind of repair inside myself. The investigation against my father ended months ago. He avoided jail time by repaying what he'd taken, but our silence remained absolute. One evening, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. His voice came through older, cracked, searching for words. I didn't listen past the first few seconds. Some things no longer needed to be reopened. I saved the message, though, like a photograph of a door I'd already closed. These days, I end my evenings on the balcony, coffee in hand, the ocean breeze drifting through the railing. The city hums below, but I hear only the slow rhythm of peace. I've learned that family isn't who needs you, it's who respects you, the ones who show up not to take, but to stand beside you when you no longer owe them anything. The sun slips below the horizon, leaving gold streaks on the water. I turn off my phone, lean back in the chair, and let the quiet settle. I just smiled and said, "Not this time. Dad,